Keir Starmer says he's pragmatic about nationalising Britain's rail, energy and water companies, despite it being one of Labour's key pledges in the last election.
But there remains confusion over his party's stance on common ownership, with shadow cabinet members seeming to contradict each other.
So Keir Starmer joins us now. So Keir, good morning. Can we just clear up this issue about nationalisation at the top? You were making a speech yesterday about growth and the economy. But before that, your Shadow Chancellor said that there wasn't space within your fiscal rules for spending billions of pounds on nationalising things. That doesn't stack up. Later in the day, the Transport Shadow Secretary said that you are committed to nationalising rail. The Express says Sir Keir acts as nationalisation. The Mirror says nationalised rail still on track. What happened yesterday and what is the party's position?
British politics like this one. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the British I Believe It, or not over 98% of viewers watch our content without hitting the follow button. Subscribing is completely free.
Well, Ed, obviously yesterday what I was doing was making a big speech about growth, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, if I may. But on this question of what do we do about, those big sectors where the market is failing, energy would be an example of that. There's a report out this morning saying the market is failing. Rail has obviously been a failed market, which is why we're in the situation we're in. My approach is really to be pragmatic about it rather than ideological, which is to say, if there's a broken market, in what way can that market be mended? And if it can be mended with regulation, then that is a route that we could go down. We've got in place quite strong fiscal rules because I think it's very important for the Labour Party going into an election, you'll understand this, Ed, to be credible on the economy. So fiscal rules about how much everything would cost. I would just say that whilst, pragmatic approaches is really driving me on this, rail is a bit of an outlier because obviously large parts of rail are already in public ownership, and we would continue that. So the rail situation is different because of the way their contracts are run. But for me, I'm not ideological where I say public is good, private is bad, or private is good, public is bad. We look at things in the round. But after COVID, there is a question of what we can afford going into that election.
So to be clear, in the leadership election, February 2020, you said you support common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water. Rail, you are still planning to nationalise. Yes. Energy and water, yes. You are taking a pragmatic approach. Does that mean that you are planning to nationalise them or not?
We're taking a pragmatic approach. So, yeah, what we're saying is, look, the market is not functioning properly. I think there's a business select committee out this morning that absolutely reinforces that. And people will feel that with the bills that they're receiving that are, far too high in many respects. So they know the market isn't working. So something's got to be done. So I'm not in a position of saying we're going to leave things as they are.
But not nationalisation.
But we've got to recognise that after COVID, we've got to be very careful about what we're able to spend going into an election. And I don't want a Labour Party that, as it was in 2019, was basically saying we can spend on anything. We've reversed those 2019 manifesto positions because we needed to show the country that we're credible, we're responsible on the economy. So we'll be pragmatic about it, but within the fiscal rules, within the amount of money that we've got to make choices.
Sure.
And if I've got choices to make, and there are other ways of fixing the market, then I'm a pragmatist and we'll go for the other ways of fixing the market. But as I say, rail is different because
how about Royal Mail, then?
Rail is virtually, or large parts are in public ownership of rail, and we wouldn't alter that.
Sure. Royal Mail?
On mail, it's pragmatic rather than ideological. But Ed, what I would say is this: that I gave a major speech yesterday on growth. No, I think, look, it's very hard to see how you can nationalise within the fiscal rules, but that's not to say that there isn't a problem that needs fixing there.
Right.
But Ed, look, looking at the state of our economy, people have, for probably the best part of a decade, have felt my wages haven't gone up.
Sure.
In the last 12 months or so, there's been a real issue with paying the bills. Yesterday, I laid out in a big speech how we would fix the economy, grow the economy, and make sure that we could raise living standards and afford to pay for our public services. Yeah. So that's where my attention was yesterday. And I don't think, actually, if I'm honest about it, the debate, although interesting, about nationalisation is actually at the heart of the debate about how we build our economy. And that's why I set out at some length what our position will be on growing the economy.
It must be a bit frustrating then that it sort of took over the speech yesterday. But just one other question on Royal Mail. You said in the speech yesterday that the test for you in the speech yesterday was what is good for growth and for productivity. Now, clearly, the row in rail at the moment is about the rail unions objecting to changes in personnel, in manning, in staffing and procedures, which the rail companies and the government say is necessary to improve productivity. Do you think in rail, because if you nationalise them, you'll be negotiating pay and terms and conditions rather than the train operating companies, do you think the rail unions are right?
What happened on live television wasn't meant to happen. This was supposed to be a routine, carefully managed interview, the kind Keir Starmer's team usually handles without a ripple. But instead, viewers witnessed something far more revealing: confusion at the very top of the Labour Party, exposed in real time. The issue was nationalisation, rail, energy, water, once the ideological backbone of Labour's platform. And the problem wasn't just what was said. It was that nobody seemed to agree on what Labour actually believes anymore. The confusion began before Starmer even opened his mouth. Earlier in the day, his shadow chancellor made it clear that Labour's fiscal rules simply don't allow for spending billions on nationalising major industries. That alone raised eyebrows. Then, only hours later, Labour's shadow transport secretary insisted that rail nationalisation was still a fine commitment. Two senior figures, two completely different messages. And then the newspapers piled in. One headline claimed Starmer had quietly dropped nationalisation altogether. Another insisted rail nationalisation was still on track. If voters were confused, they weren't imagining it. Labour was contradicting itself in public. That's when Ed Balls stepped in. Balls is no outsider. Is a former shadow chancellor, deeply familiar with Labour's economic machinery. And his questioning was calm, precise, and devastatingly effective. He didn't rant. He didn't accuse. He simply asked Starmer to clarify Labour's position. And that's where everything started to unravel. Starmer's answer was a masterclass in political evasiveness. He framed himself as pragmatic, not ideological, repeatedly returning to the idea of fixing broken markets rather than committing to public ownership outright. Regulation if possible, intervention if necessary, nationalisation only if unavoidable. On the surface, that sounds sensible. But listen carefully, and you realize what's missing: certainty. When pushed specifically on rail, Starmer admitted it was an outlier. Large parts of the rail system are already in public ownership, he said, and Labour would continue that arrangement. Not expand it, not transform it, just continue. On energy and water, the answer was even vaguer. The markets are failing, Starmer acknowledged. Bills are too high. Something must be done. But nationalisation? That depends. On affordability, on fiscal rules, on choices. In other words, maybe, or maybe not. Ed Balls didn't let him escape. He reminded Starmer of his 2020 leadership pledge: explicit support for common ownership of rail, mail, energy, and water. This wasn't ancient history. This was Starmer's own promise. So Balls asked the question voters actually care about: which pledges still stand? Rail? Yes, but only because much of it already is public. Energy and water? Pragmatic approach. Royal Mail? No clear answer. This wasn't clarification. It was retreat, dressed up as realism. Starmer repeatedly returned to one defensive line: Labour cannot repeat 2019. That manifesto, he said, promised everything to everyone and destroyed Labour's economic credibility. This time, fiscal discipline comes first. Choices must be made. Ambition must fit within strict financial rules. Politically, that makes sense. But strategically, it leaves Labour exposed. Because voters aren't just hearing caution, they are hearing hesitation. They are hearing a party unsure of its own direction. A leadership that speaks the language of reform while stripping away the substance. And that's why this interview mattered. Nationalisation isn't just a policy, it's a symbol. For decades, it represented Labour's belief that essential services should serve the public, not shareholders. Walking away from that idea, quietly, ambiguously, without saying so outright, risks alienating Labour's core supporters without necessarily winning over sceptical voters. Starmer's defenders will say this is grown-up politics, that ideology must give way to practicality, that governing requires compromise. But critics will say something else entirely, that this is Labour trying to sound like Conservatives without the courage to admit it. The most revealing moment came near the end, when Starmer tried to redirect the conversation back to his speech on economic growth. Wages stagnant, living costs soaring, bills rising. He wanted to talk about productivity, investment, credibility. And that's telling, because when a leader avoids defending their own flagship pledges, it suggests they already know those pledges are gone. This wasn't a gaffe. It wasn't a media trap. It was Labour's internal contradiction, exposed under gentle questioning. Ed Balls didn't attack Keir Starmer. He simply asked him to explain himself. And for 10 uncomfortable minutes, Starmer showed the country exactly how difficult that's becoming. The question now is simple. If Labour can't clearly explain what it believes before an election, how can voters trust it to deliver after one?